Forget the clenched fists, the raised voice, the obvious signs of aggression that fools mistake for danger. The true threat doesn't announce itself with a roar. It arrives with a smile, a placid demeanor, and a carefully constructed story of its own virtue. It's a subtle poison that mimics peace, a psychological landmine hidden beneath a perfectly manicured lawn. We are conditioned to look for the storm, but the most profound dangers are bred in the unnerving calm of the unexamined self. Here at the Sigma male community, we don't concern ourselves with the superficial theatrics of power. We delve into the mechanics of the human psyche, the raw code that dictates behavior. Today, we turn to the master architect of the soul, Carl Jung, to uncover the single most dangerous sign in a person, a sign that signals not just a flawed character, but a walking, breathing liability. This isn't about judging others from a high horse. This is about strategic awareness, about understanding the invisible forces that govern human action so that you can navigate the world with the clarity and precision of a master strategist, protecting your path and your peace. 1. The Unseen Puppeteer. When Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, he wasn't describing a simple repository for our negative traits or a basement where we lock away our vices. He was describing a dynamic, living, and profoundly powerful part of our own psyche that we have actively disowned. Imagine everything about yourself that you were taught was unacceptable, inconvenient, or bad. Your raw ambition, your capacity for righteous anger, your untamed creativity, your primal instincts. To fit into society, to be good, you cut these pieces off and cast them into the darkness of your unconscious. But they don't die. Instead, they form a hidden sub-personality, an unseen puppeteer that operates just beyond the reach of your conscious awareness. This shadow self doesn't just contain your darkness. It holds immense, untapped energy and potential. It is the source of profound vitality, but when it is denied and ignored, it pulls the strings of your life from behind the curtain, dictating your reactions, fueling your compulsions, and sabotaging your best intentions. For the man walking the path of self-reliance, this concept is paramount. True sovereignty isn't just about freedom from external systems. It's about freedom from your own internal unconscious programming. To deny your shadow is to willingly hand control of your life over to a ghost. You become predictable, easily triggered, a puppet to your own repressed frustrations and desires. The stoic mind understands that the greatest battle is within. Acknowledging your shadow, looking it squarely in the eye and admitting, yes, this too is a part of me, is not an act of weakness. It is the ultimate act of strategic integration. It is the process of reclaiming the disowned parts of your power, of taking your hand off the puppet strings and placing it firmly on the steering wheel of your own soul. You cannot control what you refuse to acknowledge, and the man who makes peace with his own potential for darkness is the only one truly in command of his light. 2. The price of polished perfection. Observe the individual who presents an image of flawless composure and unshakable virtue. Their calm is almost unnerving, their serenity a carefully polished veneer that never cracks, no matter the provocation. According to Carl Jung's framework, this immaculate outer persona is often a monumental red flag. It frequently masks a raging internal war, a deep and volatile split between the curated public self and the churning chaos of the repressed shadow. The more perfect and unblemished the mask, the more pressure builds beneath it. This isn't the earned tranquility of a man who has wrestled with his demons and integrated them. This is the fragile quiet of a man sitting on a powder keg, desperately trying to convince himself and the world that it doesn't exist. The psychological energy required to maintain such a rigid, one-sided persona is immense, and that energy creates a dangerous internal friction. This friction must find a release valve. It cannot remain contained forever. For the man of discerning judgment, this is where observation becomes a crucial tool for survival. You will not see the pressure release in a direct, honest explosion of anger or frustration. Instead, it will leak out in more insidious forms. It will manifest as subtle cruelty disguised as a joke, controlling behavior framed as loving concern, a patronizing tone veiled as helpful advice, or a sudden, shocking act of betrayal that seems to come from nowhere. This is the price of polished perfection. The Stoic path teaches us to value truth over appearance, substance over facade. When you encounter someone whose goodness seems too absolute, too clean, be wary. You're likely not witnessing a saint but a psychological pressure cooker, and the inevitable explosion will harm everyone in its vicinity. 3. The Virtue Trap. Carl Jung's ultimate warning. Here we arrive at the absolute core of Carl Jung's warning, the most dangerous psychological position a human being can occupy. The most perilous individuals are not those who are openly wrestling with their flaws, their anger, or their selfishness. The true danger lies with those who are utterly and unshakably convinced that they have no flaws to wrestle with. This delusion of inherent absolute goodness is what Carl Jung identified as a form of spiritual and psychological poison. It is a state of profound unconsciousness, a blindness that grants the individual a terrifying moral license to commit any number of harmful acts, all while maintaining a pristine self-image. Their internal narrative tells them they are fundamentally good, so any action they take must therefore be, by definition, justified. This is the virtue trap. Once a person falls into it, their capacity for self-reflection is annihilated. Harmful actions are no longer seen as harmful. They are rationalized and reframed as necessary, righteous, or for the other person's own good. The passive-aggressive comment becomes brutal honesty. The manipulative behavior becomes strategic guidance. The emotional cruelty becomes tough love. They are operating from a place of such profound self-deception that they are no longer accountable to reality. Their own myth of purity becomes their god, and they will sacrifice relationships, trust, and the well-being of others to protect it. This is why a person who admits their capacity for pettiness or anger is infinitely more trustworthy than one who claims to be above it all. The former is engaged with reality. The latter is lost in a dangerous fantasy, and their blindness itself is the weapon. Number 4. The mask we can't remove. Persona. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the persona, which he derived from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in ancient theater. This persona is the social mask we all wear. It is the curated version of ourselves that we present to the world. The professional face at work, the charming face on a date, the agreeable face in new social settings. It is a necessary and functional tool for navigating a complex social world. It allows for smooth interactions and helps us fulfill specific societal roles. A man understands the need for different masks in different arenas. It is a strategic element of social intelligence. The danger, however, arises not from wearing the mask, but from forgetting that it is a mask. The psychological crisis begins when an individual starts to mistake their carefully constructed persona for their whole self. They invest so much energy into polishing and presenting this facade that they sever the vital connection to their authentic, deeper nature, the complex, messy, and far more powerful self that lurks beneath. Carl Jung warned that this over-identification with the persona leads to a state of profound inner disconnection and superficiality. The individual becomes hollow, a collection of social roles rather than a whole human being. They lose access to the raw vitality, the creativity, and the instinctual wisdom that resides in the deeper layers of the psyche, including the shadow. They become a stranger to themselves, living a life that feels empty and inauthentic because they have abandoned their true identity in favor of a popular performance. 5. The unconscious isn't a basement, it's a factory. A common misconception is to think of the unconscious mind as a passive storage unit, a dusty basement where we simply file away forgotten memories and repressed feelings. Carl Jung's view was far more dynamic and potent. He saw the unconscious not as a basement, but as an alchemical factory, a vibrant and active force that is constantly working, transforming, and seeking expression. When you banish a powerful part of yourself into this realm, be it justified anger, deep vulnerability, or fierce ambition, it doesn't just sit there quietly gathering dust. The energy of that trait is not destroyed. It is merely relegated to the unconscious, where it begins to mutate and intensify outside of your control. This is a critical principle for understanding human behavior, both in yourself and others. What you refuse to face consciously will demand to be lived out unconsciously. The repressed energy doesn't just vanish. The factory of the unconscious reroutes it. It will find a way to erupt into your life in a distorted and often destructive form. That unacknowledged anger might emerge as chronic passive aggression or self-sabotaging behavior in your career. That buried vulnerability might manifest as a crippling fear of intimacy or an irrational need to control your partner. That stifled independence might fuel a compulsive addiction. These are not random afflictions. They are the logical output of the unconscious factory, processing the raw materials you've given it. They are the shadow's desperate attempt to get your attention, proving that what is not faced within will inevitably be confronted as fate. 6. Childhood's buried treasure and toxins. The formation of the shadow begins in the earliest days of our lives. As children, our primary drive is to secure love, approval, and safety from our caregivers and society. We quickly learn which behaviors are rewarded and which are punished or met with disapproval. The messages we receive, both spoken and unspoken, act as a chisel, sculpting our acceptable persona while casting the rejected pieces into the darkness. Good boys aren't angry. Don't be selfish. Don't be so sensitive. Don't be too loud or too ambitious. Each of these commands forces us to disown a vital part of our natural human experience to maintain connection and belonging. We learn to bury our raw vulnerability, our justified rage, our healthy self-interest, and our fierce individuality. These exiled parts of ourselves become the foundational elements of the shadow. They are not erased or destroyed. They are simply buried alive. Carl Jung believed these buried aspects contain not just toxins, but also treasures. Along with our unprocessed pain and fear, we also bury our greatest potential strengths. The raw power that could have fueled our ambition, the fierce protectiveness that could have guarded our boundaries, the deep sensitivity that could have fostered profound connection, all of it gets locked away. As adults, we often feel a vague sense of something missing, a lack of wholeness or vitality. This is the yearning of the shadow's core. It is the buried treasure calling out for recognition, though its voice has often become so distorted by years of repression that it emerges not as a call for help, but as a symptom of dysfunction. 7. Projection. Blaming your ghosts. Have you ever encountered someone who is relentlessly critical of others, constantly accusing them of being deceitful, arrogant, lazy, or manipulative? Yet when you observe this person with a clear and rational eye, you notice that the very traits they so vehemently condemn in others are glaringly present in their own behavior, though they remain utterly oblivious to it. This phenomenon is what Carl Jung termed projection, one of an unintegrated shadow's most common and destructive defense mechanisms. It is a psychological sleight of hand where the psyche, unable to bear the discomfort of acknowledging its own darkness, takes those unwanted traits and attributes them to other people. It's like having ghosts in your own house and blaming the neighbors for the noise. Projection provides a temporary and illusory sense of relief. By externalizing our own disowned qualities, we can momentarily feel superior and righteous. It purifies our self-image by making someone else the carrier of our darkness. However, this is a fool's bargain. Projection makes genuine self-awareness impossible, as it constantly directs our focus outward instead of inward where the real work needs to be done. It poisons relationships, creating conflict and misunderstanding based on a complete fiction. For the man committed to a stoic sense of personal responsibility, understanding projection is a superpower. It allows you to recognize when you are being made the scapegoat for someone else's inner demons. And more importantly, it forces you to practice the ruthless self-honesty required to ask, is my intense reaction to this person's flaw really about them? Or am I seeing a reflection of a ghost I've refused to face in myself? 8. The ticking time bomb of repression. Carl Jung's statement, "What is not made conscious will be lived out as fate," is one of the most chilling and accurate laws of human psychology. It underscores the profound danger of repression. To suppress the shadow, to push down your unwanted feelings and traits, is not an act of containment. It is the act of arming a psychological landmine and then forgetting where you buried it. The immense psychic energy of these denied aspects, the envy, the rage, the grief, the untamed desire, does not dissipate. It builds, accumulating pressure relentlessly and silently beneath the surface of your conscious mind. This isn't a stoic act of emotional control, which involves acknowledging a feeling and choosing a rational response. This is denial, which is an act of psychological cowardice. This building pressure creates a ticking time bomb. The psyche will always seek balance and wholeness. If you refuse to consciously engage with the shadow's energy, it will eventually force the issue. Left unexamined and unintegrated, this pressure will detonate. For some, it detonates as a devastating life crisis, a sudden, inexplicable affair that destroys a family, a bout of rage that ends a career, or the onset of a chronic illness with no clear physical cause. For others, it manifests as a complete psychological breakdown. The shocking acts that make us say, "That was so out of character for him," are rarely out of character at all. They are, in fact, the character of the shadow, which has been brewing and intensifying for years until it finally became powerful enough to hijack the conscious personality and live out its nature as fate. Sigma, you are the architect of your own reality, a man who walks his own path and values independence above all else. But let's be ruthlessly honest for a moment. True, unshakable power is not merely a matter of external control. It is forged in the crucible of radical internal awareness. That stoic exterior, that calm and rational demeanor you cultivate, that is your strength, your armor in a chaotic world. But what about the frustrations you dismiss as trivial? The flicker of envy you refuse to acknowledge? The profound vulnerability you have buried under layers of self-reliance? That is your shadow, whispering in the quiet moments, waiting in the wings. Ignoring it doesn't make you stronger. It makes you predictable to yourself. It makes you a puppet to your own hidden triggers, a slave to reactions you don't even understand. Integrating your shadow is not about becoming soft or losing your edge. It is the ultimate strategic advantage. It means owning your full spectrum of humanity, from your capacity for profound tenderness to your potential for ruthless aggression, and wielding it all consciously. To acknowledge your anger is not to be controlled by it, but to harness its fuel. To accept your vulnerability is not to be weak, but to understand precisely where you need to build your strongest defenses. This isn't about navel-gazing. This is about knowing the complete arsenal at your disposal. This is the difference between being a lone island and being a self-contained fortress. Are you truly mastering your own depths, or are they silently, patiently mastering you? 9. The leakage of the banished. The immense tension created between the polished, perfect mask of the persona and the repressed energy of the shadow is inherently unstable. The psyche cannot maintain this state of internal division indefinitely without consequence. The banished energy, like water seeking a crack in a dam, must find a release. It will leak out. It rarely stays neatly bottled up as intended. These leaks are often the first clear, observable signs that you're dealing with a person who has a dangerously unintegrated shadow. A man trained in rational observation, who looks beyond the surface-level presentation, can learn to spot these psychological tells with startling accuracy. These leaks are not random, out-of-character moments. They are the shadow forcing its way through the cracks of the conscious personality. Pay close attention to the individual whose primary form of humor is cutting sarcasm or cruel wit that always seems to have a victim. Watch for the person whose protection and care feels suffocatingly controlling. Be wary of the individual who prides themselves on their cold rationality, but is emotionally unavailable to a pathological degree. And most clearly, observe the person who erupts in disproportionate, shocking rage over a minor incident. These are not isolated behavioral quirks. They are symptoms. They are the direct, tangible evidence of a repressed inner world fighting for expression, signaling a deep and volatile instability just beneath the calm facade. 10. The paradox of the good person. Here lies one of the most profound and cruel ironies of human psychology, a paradox that Carl Jung identified with piercing clarity. The more rigidly and desperately a person clings to an external identity of being purely good, moral, spiritual, or righteous, the more likely they are to unconsciously act out the very opposite of these traits in their behavior. This isn't because they are simple hypocrites in the traditional sense. The dynamic is far more insidious than that. It's because their fanatical commitment to their own goodness requires them to bury any awareness of their own shadow so deeply that it is completely severed from their conscious mind. It is given free rein to operate in the darkness, unchecked and unexamined. This creates a bizarre and dangerous split. Their proclaimed virtue becomes the perfect smokescreen for their hidden darkness to operate with impunity. The spiritual guru who preaches non-attachment may be ruthlessly controlling his followers' finances. The moral crusader who publicly decries sin may be engaging in precisely that behavior in secret. The person who constantly talks about the importance of kindness may be the most passive-aggressive and emotionally cruel individual in their private life. Their conscious mind is so thoroughly identified with the light that their shadow side is left to run wild, completely autonomous. They aren't lying in the way a common con man does. They are lying to themselves so completely that their conscious self genuinely believes the virtuous facade, making them capable of acts of darkness without a shred of guilt. 11. The shadow's true nature. Not evil, just exiled. It is a fundamental error to demonize the shadow, to equate it with a pit of pure evil that must be vanquished. Carl Jung was clear that this view is not only inaccurate but also counterproductive. The shadow is dangerous only when it is ignored. In its essence, the shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply what has been exiled. It is the repository of our rejected life force. Contained within it are some of the most vital and powerful aspects of our humanity: our untapped creativity, the fierce protectiveness of a cornered animal, our healthy and necessary assertiveness, our deep sensuality, and our raw, primal instincts. These are the very things that make us feel alive, potent, and whole. Society, our upbringing, or our own fears often tell us that these powerful energies are wrong, dangerous, or unacceptable. So we banish them. The danger, therefore, arises not from the nature of the shadow itself, but from the act of repression. When this potent life force is denied conscious and constructive expression, it curdles in the darkness. Healthy assertiveness, when repressed, turns into bitter resentment or manipulative control. Fierce protectiveness, when denied, can mutate into irrational jealousy. The shadow becomes a problem only when we refuse to build a relationship with it. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow, an impossible and undesirable task, but to turn and face it, to bring its contents into the light of consciousness, where its raw energy can be integrated and harnessed for productive, life-affirming purposes. 12. The blind spot of self-righteousness. Moral superiority is not a virtue. It is a psychological trapdoor that leads directly into a dungeon of self-deception. When an individual becomes utterly convinced of their own righteousness, a critical human faculty is switched off, the capacity for self-criticism. They develop a monumental blind spot where their own flaws and negative motivations should be. Once this happens, they lose the ability to see their own role in any conflict, failure, or painful situation. Every action they take, no matter how objectively harmful or selfish, is automatically filtered through their internal lens of virtue and reframed as justified, necessary, or even noble. They become the perpetual hero or victim in their own story, psychologically incapable of casting themselves as the villain. This blindness is not simple ignorance. It is an active and powerful defense mechanism. The ego constructs this fortress of self-righteousness to protect its fragile and idealized self-image from the terrifying truth of its own shadow. To admit fault, to acknowledge a moment of pettiness, envy, or cruelty, would be to shatter the entire virtuous persona they depend on for their sense of identity. Therefore, their psyche will fight to the death to maintain the delusion. This makes them incredibly dangerous in relationships and partnerships. You cannot reason with someone who is incapable of seeing their own contribution to a problem. You cannot find resolution with someone who has outsourced all blame. Their self-righteousness makes them a black hole for personal responsibility. 13. Trustworthiness lies in shadow awareness. This principle runs counter to everything society teaches us about trust, yet it is a profound psychological truth. The safest, most reliable, and trustworthy people are not the saints who claim to have transcended all human flaws. The most trustworthy people are the sinners who know they are sinners. A person who can openly acknowledge their own capacity for jealousy, their moments of anger, their potential for selfishness, or their internal struggles is infinitely safer than the one who presents a facade of perfection. The reason is simple. The person who sees their shadow is actively monitoring it. They have internal checks and balances. They know its tricks. They recognize its whisperings, and they can consciously choose not to let it take the driver's seat. Conversely, the person who believes they are perfect or inherently good has no internal security system. By denying the existence of their shadow, they have dismantled the very mechanisms needed to control it. They are flying blind, completely unaware of the dark impulses that may be motivating their actions. Their unconscious is at the helm, and they don't even know it. When seeking allies, partners, or friends, the Stoic mind does not look for flawless character, which is a fiction, but for self-awareness. Trust the person who can say, "I have to watch my temper," or "I can be arrogant sometimes." They are engaged in the real and difficult work of self-mastery. The one who claims to have no such battles to fight is the one you should never, ever trust. 14. The spiritual emergency. For Carl Jung, the process of confronting and integrating the shadow was not just a step in psychological healing. It was a non-negotiable requirement for genuine spiritual development. To deny the shadow, in his view, was to commit a profound spiritual failure. It represents a fundamental refusal to engage with the totality of the human experience. It is an attempt to live a half-life, embracing only the light and acceptable parts of oneself, while rejecting the sacred darkness that provides balance, depth, and grounding. This denial creates a sanitized, fragile, and ultimately false spirituality, one that is built on avoiding difficulty rather than transmuting it. This refusal to engage with our whole selves, both light and dark, cuts us off from the source of true wholeness. It severs our connection not only to our own authentic identity, but also to the deeper, mysterious currents of the universe itself. True spiritual maturity isn't about floating above the messy reality of being human. It's about having the courage to descend into the depths of our own nature and bring back the lost treasures. It's about understanding that the sacred can be found in the mud as well as in the lotus. The person who denies their shadow is not more spiritual. They are spiritually impoverished, living in a well-lit but sterile room, completely unaware of the vast, rich, and vital mansion that is their own soul. 15. The core danger sign: absence of doubt. If we are to distill all of Carl Jung's wisdom into a single actionable red flag, it is this: the most dangerous sign in a person is the complete and total absence of self-doubt regarding their own goodness or the purity of their motives. When you encounter an individual who cannot even for a moment entertain the possibility that they might be wrong, that they might be acting from a place of hidden self-interest, or that they are capable of the same pettiness they see in others, you are in the presence of extreme danger. This absolute, unshakable certainty is the definitive hallmark of a dangerously unintegrated shadow that has completely taken over the driver's seat of the personality. This person is not strong. They are brittle. Their certainty is not a sign of confidence, but a defense against the terrifying fragility of their ego. They have built a psychological fortress around the idea of their own infallibility, and they will perceive any challenge to that idea as a life-threatening attack. This makes them unpredictable, irrational, and incapable of genuine negotiation or compromise. They are a walking liability because their reality is entirely self-created and non-negotiable. For the Sigma man, whose path is defined by realism, adaptability, and a clear-eyed assessment of the world, this type of person is psychic poison. Your logic cannot penetrate their delusion. Your reason cannot sway their self-righteousness. Recognize this absence of doubt for what it is, the ultimate warning sign to disengage and walk away immediately. 16. Breakdown or breakthrough. The psychological pressure cooker of repression cannot contain the energy of the shadow forever. The psyche, in its relentless drive toward wholeness, will continue to send up signals. These signals often begin as whispers, a vague anxiety, a recurring destructive pattern in relationships, a nagging sense of emptiness. If the whispers are ignored, the psyche begins to shout, escalating the signals into compulsive behaviors, chronic depression, or explosive outbursts. Carl Jung believed that this escalating crisis point forces a profound choice upon the individual, a fork in the road of their own soul. It is the choice between a breakdown and a breakthrough. The breakdown is the tragic outcome of continued denial. It is the moment the dam finally bursts, and the conscious ego is completely overwhelmed by the chaotic, repressed contents of the unconscious. This is the stuff of nervous breakdowns, life-imploding crises, and a total loss of control. The breakthrough, however, is the path of courage. It is the moment the individual finally stops running, turns around, and chooses to consciously face the shadow they have been fleeing their entire life. It is an arduous and often painful process of dismantling the false persona, taking responsibility for the darkness within, and beginning the slow work of integrating that powerful energy into a new, more authentic and whole personality. Ignoring the whispers inevitably leads to the scream. The wise man learns to listen to the whispers. The path of the Sigma male is a path of truth, and the ultimate truth is that mastery of the world begins with mastery of the self. The wisdom of Carl Jung doesn't just give us a lens to judge the flawed world around us. It gives us a mirror. The most dangerous sign in another person is a reflection of the most dangerous potential within ourselves, the potential for self-deception. Here at the Sigma Male community, we don't deal in comforting lies or simplistic motivational quotes. We engage with the real, complex, and often difficult mechanics of power, psychology, and self-mastery. The journey to integrate your own shadow is the great work of a lifetime, but it is the only work that leads to true, unshakable sovereignty. If you are committed to this path, the path of ruthless self-honesty, strategic awareness, and profound personal growth, then subscribe to this channel. This is not just a collection of videos, it is a resource for men who refuse to be puppets to their own programming. Reflect on these principles, observe them in the world, but most importantly, have the courage to observe them in yourself. Master your depths, or they will master you. The choice, as always, is yours.